Tourism Alliance Conservation Tourism webinar series, Protecting the Future of Tourism. Before we get on to the topic, I'd like to give you a quick introduction to the Alliance. The Alliance was born a week after the Easter Sunday attack, private sector group. We launched the Love Sri Lanka campaign that went viral. Since then, we've had almost 2,000 members in Sri Lanka and overseas signing up to join the Tourism Alliance. Membership is free, open to all involved in tourism, companies and individuals. Our objective is to drive sustainable tourism visitor growth, befitting all segments. Our members come from all sections of the industry, travel agents, hoteliers, large hotels, small hotels, SMEs. It really is a cross-section of the industry in Sri Lanka. Betterment of Sri Lanka tourism is our only goal. So today's session is very much in keeping with our sustainable tourism agenda. We have two websites. We have the lovesrilanka.org consumer site, which encourages foreign travelers to visit Sri Lanka. It highlights places to visit, things you can do. And then we have the srilankatourismalliance.com, which is the trade site, which is learning tools, industry news, reports, latest updates in terms of reopening, and also a jobs portal, which will become useful hopefully next year when hotels start recruiting again. So that's a brief introduction about the Tourism Alliance. On to today's program. Sri Lanka's tourism industry has always been heavily reliant on nature and its many blessings. In this two-part webinar series, the Tourism Alliance will explore wildlife and nature conservation as it applies to the future of tourism in our country. Our rich biodiversity and natural landscapes form the very foundation of our tourism industry. It is the primary attraction for travelers who come here. Nature-based tourism attractions bring in substantial revenue for local and national economies and contribute heavily to employment. We know that travelers who come here don't come for shopping, they don't necessarily come for casinos, they don't come for big city delights, whatever they may be. They come for our rural, pristine nature, whether it is our beaches, whether it is our mountains, whether it is our wildlife safari parks, which is outside Africa, are probably the best. That's what they come for. But the rate at which we are impacting our nature is akin to a hotelier setting fire to a wing of their hotel. I mean, I'm being drastic here, but frankly, if we don't have nature, all our businesses are in jeopardy. That's why during this session, we are hoping to stress, and I hope that everyone watching will understand that without protecting our biodiversity, when an elephant gets killed, when a leopard gets killed, when the gathering gets impacted, it is essential, it is tantamount to us cannibalizing future bookings. So we have to make that connection and hopefully understand how it can be mitigated. Unfortunately, Sri Lanka's natural world faces many challenges. The elephant gathering at Minaria, for instance, which I'm sure you'll hear about. The pandemic has provided an opportunity to pause and reassess our priorities to make tourism in Sri Lanka resilient, sustainable, and future-focused, particularly as we start the global promotion campaign to position this country as it should be after almost a decade. It's important to understand that what we will be positioning on, one of our key pillars, is our nature and our biodiversity. From an industry perspective, what are we doing to protect our golden goose, and how should we prepare ourselves for tomorrow's travelers? So let me just move on quickly to introduce the panelists. Dr. Sumit Pilipita, I'm sure he's a household name here in Sri Lanka and abroad. Former Director General of Department of Wildlife Conservation. He has led environmental management, biodiversity, and conservation projects in several South Asian countries for the World Bank. Most recently, he has been spending his time on addressing the human-elephant conflict. Srilal Miththapala is an avid wildlife lover, conservationist, and sustainable tourism expert. A past president of the Hotels Association of Sri Lanka. He's particularly passionate about elephants and has published many articles on their importance to Sri Lanka, especially their importance to the tourism industry. Toby Sinclair. Toby is in London, up at 6 a.m. for the Dawn Patrol. He is a director of And Beyond Asia, member of the Government of India Steering Committee on Protected Area Management, co-founder, Responsible Tourism Society of India, recipient of the Carl Zeiss Award for Conservation. He handled the field production, still handles, of the BBC Natural History Unit, filming in the wilderness areas of South Asia. These films are broadcast on Discovery, Animal Planet, National Geographic, in addition to the BBC. Finally, last but not least, moderated by Niranga Gunaratna, who is the Director of Communications at Shangri-La and a member of the Tourism Alliance Emerging Leaders Program. Over to you, Niranga. Looking forward to a really stimulating session. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Malik, for that introduction. I'd also, sorry, I think there's an echo. If you could mute your mics. Thank you so much. I'd also like to welcome our panelists once again, Dr. Sumit, Srilal, and Toby. Thank you for joining us. Welcome also to our virtual audience who have joined us this morning. Today, we'll be taking a deep dive into the critical importance of Sri Lanka's nature and wildlife toward the long-term sustainability of the tourism industry. As many of us know, in the last few years, Sri Lanka has won a multitude of accolades, be it from Lonely Planet or CNN. Some of these accolades are directly for the destination, while some of them actually pertain specifically to nature and wildlife, clearly showing the competitive advantage that Sri Lanka holds. So today, what we'll be doing is we'll be looking at the key issues that are faced, and most importantly, the solutions that we can look at collectively. Before we begin, I'd like to welcome all. I can see some questions already coming through, but we'd like to invite our audience to share any questions that they have, either on the Zoom link or on Facebook Live. So to start off, let's first talk about the importance of Sri Lanka's nature and wildlife and the role that it plays in tourism. Dr. Sumith, I'd like to direct this question to you. What's so special about Sri Lanka's nature and wildlife offering in terms of biodiversity-based tourism?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me to speak to you all. To respond to your question, I think Sri Lanka has the potential to be the best wildlife tourism destination outside Africa. And I stress the term potential, the word potential, because that doesn't necessarily mean we can achieve it, but we do have the potential. Now, let me talk about the resources for this potential. Sri Lanka, a study has rated Sri Lanka #1 in Asia in a category called observability, which means charismatic species can be observed in a very short period of time. Sri Lanka also topped the same survey, the list on nature tourism potential ranking. So in the Asian countries, we are #1 in the nature tourism potential ranking, as well as in observability. In addition to having our own big five, the elephants, leopards, sloth bear, blue whales, and sperm whales, we also have other unique features. Yala and Vilpattu national parks are among the best parks to see leopard, almost among the best parks in the world to see leopard. Yala has among the highest densities of leopards in the world, and leopards are generally very elusive, so sighting them are difficult. But in Yala, the leopards seem to have been habituated to vehicles, so you can see some fantastic sightings. Mirissa and Trincomalee are among the best places in the world to see leopards. To see whales, blue whales and sperm whales. Minneria, Kaudulla and Udawalawe are home to large herds of Asian elephants, and some of the best Asian elephant sightings among the 13 Asian elephant range states could be in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka also has the largest predictably occurring seasonal concentration of wild elephants anywhere in Asia, which is known as the gathering of the Minneria, the Great Elephant Gathering in Minneria National Park. But there are some issues with regard to the gathering that I would like to talk about at a later point in this discussion if I get an opportunity. Sri Lanka is the only country in the world where you can see the largest oceanic mammal, the whale, as well as the largest terrestrial mammal, the elephant, all within a space of 12 hours. There is nowhere in the world you can see both within a space of 12 hours. So we have some fantastic birding sites in the south as well as in the north of the country. Our rainforests, particularly Singharaja and Horton Plains, which are global biodiversity hotspots, are teeming with smaller species and unique flora, which are endemic to Sri Lanka. We also have breathtaking landscapes, and from rainforested mountains to coral reefs. So when it comes to biodiversity resources, there is no doubt that Sri Lanka has what it takes to reach its potential of being the best wildlife tourism destination outside Africa. But do I think we will become the best wildlife tourism destination outside Africa? Well, the way we are heading right now, I doubt this very much. As a country, we have no strategy to achieve this potential. This is what we should be doing. We should be identifying national parks and forest reserves that can be developed exclusively for high-end wildlife tourism destinations. We should be developing plans, training staff, and providing facilities needed for these sites to be high-end wildlife tourism destinations. Ideally, we should have plans for ensuring that parks like Wilpattu and Kumana don't become overcrowded by introducing limits to all parks that are not overcrowded at this point, to make sure that they don't become overcrowded in the future. The limits could be something slightly above the maximum going in there now. So there will be no political or public pressure to remove these limits. We have 5 overcrowded parks in Sri Lanka, which is Yala, Udawalawe, Minneria, Kaudulla, and Horton Plains. So we should be preparing plans and take action to manage visitation in these parks. And in this context, I don't mean just trying to limit the numbers of vehicles. I have seen instances in Yala with just 4 to 5 vehicles creating traffic jams. So we should be looking at zonings, developing one-way road systems, and bringing in a better regulatory system. And we had a fantastic opportunity of doing this within the COVID period, but we have not done so. And I don't think, I think it's still not too late. Am I critical only of the authorities for not doing this? No, because the authorities have never been strategic in any sector in Sri Lanka. I'm more critical of the private tourism sector, because they seem to be happy with the current state of play as they are making money now. I'm talking about the pre-COVID period. You all are making money from nature tourism, wildlife tourism right now. So you don't seem to be too bothered about trying to strategically develop this sector. The private tourism sector does not seem to have a strategic vision to develop wildlife tourism market in Sri Lanka. I am critical because the private tourism sector has the bargaining power with the government. You can pressurize the government and guide them towards the right strategy and get them to implement plans to improve the quality of wildlife tourism, because you bring in the dollars to the country. You have a seat at the table. So I urge you to use this seat at the table and take this sector to the potential it can achieve. Because as far as the government goes, we conservationists are seen as a pain in the rear end, and we have no bargaining power. So if Sri Lanka is to reach its potential in becoming the best wildlife tourism destination outside Africa, the private tourism sector has to play a significant role to make that happen. And you have to unite in trying to do that.
Thanks a lot.
So I will stop at this point, but I have a few more things that I could add later. Thank you, Niranga.
Thanks, Sumit, for the initial thoughts on how rich our biodiversity is, but what we need to do to retain it. Toby, I'd like to direct the next question to you, picking up from what Dr. Sumit has shared with us. How do we compare with global competitors? How does Sri Lanka compare with the rest of the world?
I had to unmute. Thank you for involving me in this discussion. There's only one thing I disagreed with Sumit on. I know conservationists are a pain in the butt in many, many places, but conservationists have a role not just to the travel trade, the tourism industry, but to society. The parks that we see as destinations for wherever it is, we're talking specifically Sri Lanka, as destinations are in fact the sort of nation's treasure house. This is where your jewels are kept. This is where your water comes from. This is what protects your watersheds. I mean, it's an old story. It's what produces the oxygen. These are your carbon sinks. So they need to be protected for national economic reasons. Tourism is the bonus, in a sense, can deliver the bonus, because those gives the parks something that managers would, not just the park managers, but governments would like to see, which is cash. But the real value of Sri Lanka's parks, protected areas, forests, whether they're protected or not protected, is as a treasure house and as a storage area for your wealth. It is a national treasury. How does Sri Lanka compare with other countries? 20 years ago, there was an article which said that Yala was the best place in the world to see leopards. It was one of the great wildlife experiences of the world. The gathering at Benaria was sort of discovered and publicized in the mid-noughties and became rightly sort of gloated over because it was such an extraordinary experience. But because the country's gone for quantity rather than quality, those experiences have dropped. The quality of those experiences have dropped. And it got to a stage when driving in Yala, for instance, became a bit like sort of driving down Gaul Road at 5 o'clock in the evening with all your windows open, getting all the dust and the everything from the other vehicle and pollution. And the leopards, who, as Sumit said, have become habituated to vehicles, sort of now just get up and walk away. 15 years ago, you could drive towards a leopard, stop, and the leopard would then may get up after 4 or 5 minutes and come towards you. That doesn't happen any longer because the leopard is surrounded by other vehicles. There is total lack of training in all parks for drivers. And one of the things that really makes African parks stand out, and other places, the United States has phenomenal park operations. Nepal has very good operations, parts of India, and things that we could learn from other countries. Sri Lanka can learn from other countries' mistakes, not just look at sort of have rankings saying we've got to get to that level. You can get to that level. But it's, as Sumit suggested, it's a multi-pronged approach. Numbers are relevant. It is a relevant discussion. If you have unlimited numbers coming in, you will destroy areas in 5 to 6 years rather than 18 to 20 years. You're just going to accelerate the destruction and the decay. But controlling numbers, improving the training of the every vehicle, every driver going into the park can be done through a licensing system, or then we've discussed it endlessly over the last decade or more. Just to put this in context, I first came to Sri Lanka in 1980 and spent time in Wilpattu and Galoya. And I've been, in the last 40 years, I have lived in Sri Lanka for periods of time when we set up the And Beyond office in Colombo. And I've got to know and love the country as much as anywhere in the world. And I long to get back. So I'm not saying this as an outsider, I'm saying it as a sort of, I think, relatively well-informed visitor. So Sri Lanka, the potential of Sri Lanka is enormous. I'm optimistic, otherwise I wouldn't be in this business. But I am very concerned that we're going to kill the golden goose, and we're not going to get that egg. And if we manage things, the eggs. It doesn't matter whether it's our reefs, our coasts, our forests, our scrublands. The same problem applies to all these areas. And just allowing sort of recreational tourism en masse in areas of natural biodiversity, which is outside a protected area, is equally destructive as allowing hundreds of jeeps into Yala on a particular day. I'll stop there because we need to move on.
Thanks so much, Toby, for those insights. Srilal, I'd like to move on to you, and we're aware that you've done a lot of work in terms of gathering economic data and the impact that wildlife and nature actually has on the tourism industry. The question we'd like to ask you is, economically, what is the value of Sri Lanka's nature and wildlife to the visitor economy as a whole?
Yeah, thanks everyone for inviting me to participate from fairly far off like Toby. Yeah, what took me on this line is with my colleagues like Sumit and Prithviraj, we were talking once and we realized we are just talking, we are doing a conversation that perhaps the politicians don't understand. If we talk money, maybe they will understand a little better. And I started looking at the numbers and tried to put some figures by taking some assumptions. Like, for example, in the gathering, it was only for 5 months. I looked at how many hotel rooms are there. I tracked how much of occupancy they are getting, because during those months, how much the occupancy goes up, what's their rate, and tried to get indirect and direct earnings. So from that, I managed to find out that the gathering perhaps is worth something like about 22 million US dollars for those 5 months. For the Jeep drivers, they get a big slice of the earnings. So it's very interesting that this is exactly what sustainable tourism is all about. That the income gets spread, and there's a lot of, in fact, too many Jeeps right now, but we are giving them a livelihood, and they depend on that. Similarly, the wildlife department gets a lot of money, and so do the hotels. So similarly, I worked out for all the different units. I found that Yala is about 38 million. US, Udawalwe comes low, 10 million. Gathering 22 million, and it's about 70 million US dollars between these 3 parks. That is valuable, as Toby said, for tourism. That's the golden eggs that we are sitting on, that we don't realize this. When you put these numbers, perhaps I thought it will waken some people up, but I'm not sure whether it has achieved. Then my good friend Sanak Ukwatta told me that day, Srilal, how much is an elephant worth? So then I went back to my analysis. I looked at the number of elephants in the 3 parks from the studies done by Dr. Shermin and Prutu. I looked at the earnings in the same manner and divided. I came up with a number of 1,500 elephants, and I put a derating factor because people go to Udawalawe to see elephants. So the earnings are about 90%. But Yala, people go to see leopards. So I derated the elephants factor in attracting tourists. And I came with a very interesting number that an elephant is worth $22,000, which is about 4 million rupees. So that's the value of elephants. So if we have lost 200, I think 300 elephants last year, you can imagine monetary terms, what have we lost? So this is the type of angle I wanted to take. Certainly tourism depends on wildlife. Tourism is only about a very small component right now, but I found that the number of people going to see wildlife in wildlife parks has increased. And in 2018, out of all the 2.2 million tourists who came to Sri Lanka, 50% went to see wildlife parks. But that's not to say that all these guys are diehard wildlife people. Some people just want to tick the boxes. But we have to look at how these people how the earnings can be channeled. Now, that's another interesting thing. Sumit will be more competent to talk about it. All this money earned, at least the money earned by the Department of Wildlife, goes into the black hole of the treasury. And very little really comes back as a grant or as an allocation every year. So this is the unfortunate thing, that we are sitting on, we are attracting a lot of income, particularly the wildlife department, but that goes in and we don't see any of that or too much of that, which can be plowed back for conservation.
Srilal, I think some fantastic points there for our listeners. It's very easy for us to see the qualitative beauty of Sri Lanka's nature, but quantifying it for those of us in the tourism industry and understanding this economic data is going to be critical for us to save our wildlife, manage it also for our benefit. I'd like to also move on to another question, and Toby, this one will be for you. In a fast evolving world where consumer needs keep changing, and currently we're looking at a COVID impacted world as well, our question to you is, what are global visitors seeking in terms of wildlife and nature-based tourism at present?
That's a very important point, one that we have been preparing for really since the day COVID broke out. And as this period of inaction gets longer, we keep sort of adding to it and finding new ideas to try and develop things. And one of those ideas is keeping things relatively small and compact. So even if you were going to run a group tour to somewhere, you would do it with less than 10 people. Plus, we're not moving huge numbers. We're not moving a coach load of 30, for instance. Not that we did that very often as a company, but it's done in the trade. The other is going to fewer places, but staying for a little longer. So you could still come to a country for 10, 14 days, but instead of, and this is one of my long-term things about sort of comments about Sri Lanka, is, and Srilal sort of touched upon it by saying 50% of visitors to Sri Lanka have a wildlife experience, but most of them is just ticking a box. They're not, tours are being sold which have, let's say, cultural triangle, archaeology. We have culture, we have in Kandy and elsewhere. We have beaches, we have the tea experiences, and we have wildlife. Now, I honestly do not believe that most people going on a holiday want to be bussed around going to 5 different places in 10 days. They would much rather go and see a couple of interesting things. And by example, I'll just say the cultural triangle and maybe Kandy, and then go and spend a week on a beach. Because they're looking for a holiday, they're looking for downtime, they're looking for a little bit of stimulation and then a longer period of perhaps indulgence or just doing nothing. And I think we often tailor, the itineraries are often tailored wrong, incorrectly. And sending someone to Yala, sort of bus turns up at midday, they have lunch somewhere quickly, they're put into jeeps, and a convoy of sort of 8 jeeps, 8 Land Cruisers or Mitsubishis or whatever they are, Mahindras if they're unlucky, go into the park in order. They're all separated by 50 to maybe 50 meters. And the ones at the back really have little experience. They're not disciplined to leapfrog each other, which could easily be done if the tour operator sort of thought about what the client's experience. The people who get in the back are sandblasted, and they get much more of a expensive spa treatment by having their skin exfoliated by dust than they get from as a wildlife experience. So I think one of the expectations that more and more that people are going to have is more time at one place, more space in one place. And I really do think it's unnecessary to include a wildlife experience in every visit for every visitor to Sri Lanka. I think you're destroying the product. Going back to your sort of question a bit more about
what are the travelers seeking?
Yeah, it's not just wildlife. You mentioned nature tourism. Now, nature tourism is, in a sense, is in doing something in harmony with nature within your environment. So it could just as easily be going to a small converted tea bungalow up in the hill country and going for walks, going bird watching. That is nature tourism. Nature tourism doesn't mean getting in a jeep and being sandblasted in Yala. And I think people are going to want to get away for periods. I think a lot of people will take longer holidays, partly because they've been locked down for the last 18 months. So while even the North American traveler who really stick to 10 days to 12 days, Europeans can get many more days a year to travel. I think even the Americans will want to come to a place but really like to focus on 2 or 3 experiences rather than trying to say, right, 2022, I'm going to tick off Sri Lanka. In 2023, I'm going to go to Bolivia or whatever it is. So I do think we need to be more aware of that. And then, of course, people want space when they go. They don't want to be cheek by jowl. Wearing masks on airplanes, in public transport, in public spaces, is going to be a fact of life for maybe 10 years. Who knows? Maybe forever, until the next pandemic comes on and we go, and the whole cycle starts. We'd forgotten in 100 years what a pandemic is. The next one's going to come around much quicker. So yes, we need to plan, we need to change, we need to be flexible, and we need to be aware of what the traveler wants, not what it's convenient for a tour operator in Colombo to operate.
Thanks, Toby, for those insights. Something I think we're picking up here is when we speak of high value, low impact tourism, not just as a term, but Sri Lanka can really live up to its promise to the international traveler, but change what we're doing and not make Yala sort of a compulsory part of every trip, because there's so much more that the country actually has to offer.
Can I come in on that and just say, yes. I agree that is and can be and maybe perhaps should be the objective, but you have to have political and administrative will to do it. If the people at the top are just looking at today's the income today and not looking at the potential income 10 years, 15 years, which of course is outside the political cycle, we're never going to make a change.
I understand, Toby. I think this is also where advocacy matters from those who are involved in the industry, and our long-term sustenance also depends on all of this. So as you say, policy change and all these areas come into play for us.
I should stress that's not just a Sri Lankan problem.
We understand, Tony. Moving on, Srilal, actually picking up from what Toby has shared with us, how important are these visitor experiences, these good visitor experiences for Sri Lanka's future as a tourism destination?
Very much, because as Toby said, we are seeing newer travelers now who are seeking experiences. No longer is tourism about a room and some good food. It's all about experiences, and wildlife seeking travelers are looking for a much richer experience. Now that's where I think what Toby and I think Sumit touched on. And what I think, Sumit, when we prepared that report on Yala, we came up with this proposal that can't we segregate the two types of tourists? The guys who are wanting to tick the box, I saw one leopard, one bear, 2 elephants, and put them through a channel, maybe to one park. Too bad. Let that park be the one that takes these people. And the diehards who really want to immerse themselves, maybe have Vilpattu for that. Because the damage in Yala is very difficult to recover. So some radical out-of-the-box thinking like that. Then on that same basis, you need interpretation. It's not that I saw 1 elephant, 2 elephants, 3 elephants. This is this is a Sri Lankan elephant, only found in Sri Lanka, a distinct subspecies. How many tourists go back knowing this? I'll bet you last dollar that not many people know that. So interpretation is important. We must have good interpreters at different levels. For the really die-hard, serious wildlife enthusiast, we must have a different type of interpreter. I remember when we were sent by USA to Costa Rica many years ago, we were astounded to find out that the guides, 90% of the guides were having a biology or zoology degree. That's the level of interpretation that they provided. So I think that is an important thing, the quality against quantity. But what I felt was we must balance it. Rather than say we only want the groups of 10, let's take this and go. And on that note, I would like to quickly talk about the changing of conservation idea. In the good old days, conservation was protection. You go there and protect everything. You close it up. But tell me one park in Sri Lanka that has not been damaged by people. We have intervened, we have damaged, we have logged, we have poached. So now it's a question of we have to continue doing this. So I think learning from my good friend and mentor, Dr. Sarath Kotagama, conservation should be now not only save, but save, manage, and use it for tourism, but in a responsible manner, unlike the good old days. So that's where I think Sri Lanka tourism also should move towards this situation where we understand it much better. And as Sumit said, we can twist the arms of the politicians much better than any other industry, because we are the guys who bring the big bucks. We are the guys who can at least control the jeep drivers to some extent. Some years ago, I tried to get all the tour operators to come together and have a blacklist of jeep drivers who don't behave well. We will blacklist them. But what do we do by blacklisting? We don't give them hires for 1 month. That's the solution. Because then no one can tell, we are not going to take that guy. Too bad. He can go to politicians, he can go anywhere else. But he can't. So, there are solutions, out-of-the-box thinking that we can do to try and mitigate. I'm not saying that we can solve everything, but to mitigate this situation and develop it in a better fashion.
Srilal, I think your point of save, manage, and use is a great umbrella for us to work under as a tourism industry. Before we move on, I'd just like to remind our virtual audience, if you have any questions, continue posting them on Facebook Live and the Zoom link. We'll be getting back to them at the end of this chat. Moving on now to another really important part of this webinar. Let's focus on the current risks and the issues that we face in terms of wildlife and biodiversity. Dr. Sumith, I'd like to come to you first because this is very much your area of specialization. Can you briefly take us through the macro issues impacting Sri Lanka's nature-based tourism?
Well, if we look at the country, Sri Lanka has the highest biodiversity per unit area in Asia. We are listed as one of the 34 biodiversity hotspots in the world. However, we are known as a hotspot not only because we have unique biodiversity, but also because our biodiversity is under threat. So let's see how we rate as a country in biodiversity conservation. According to the 2007 IUCN Red List of threatened fauna and flora, 33% of Sri Lanka's inland vertebrate fauna and 61% of its flora are threatened. Around 33% of the threatened biodiversity is endemic. 31 species of endemic amphibians have not been recorded during the past 100 years, and these species could, for most purposes, be considered extinct. And 1 in every 12 species of Sri Lanka's inland indigenous vertebrates is currently facing an immediate or extremely high risk of extinction in the wild. 1 in 12 species are facing immediate or extremely high risk of extinction in the wild. Experts suggest that this trend will continue unless some more systematic and stringent corrective measures are taken. This came out in 2007, it's 2021 now. Unfortunately, we have not taken any meaningful steps to try to correct this. So our scorecard on biodiversity conservation is not good. And as Toby said, or cautioned us, not to kill the goose that lays the golden egg, we seem to be killing the goose that is laying the golden egg, unfortunately. But let me also take a couple of minutes to address another significant conservation issue for elephants and also a serious potential problem for tourism. That is the great elephant gathering in Min area, listed as one of the 10 wildlife wonders of the world by Lonely Planet. Now, during the months of June to mid-October or so, we see hundreds of elephants gathering in the grasslands of Min area. There is a misperception that the elephants are coming to Min area during the dry season because of water. They are not coming to Min area because of water, they are coming because of the grasslands. From historical times, we had a seasonal fluctuation of the water in Min area reservoir, which resulted in creating ideal elephant habitat during the months of June to October. In the monsoon time, the grasslands are submerged, killing the grass. And when we start releasing water for irrigation from April onwards, the grasslands gets exposed. That results in a good growth of grass, which is higher in protein than mature grass. So that is what brings all the elephants to Min area. Unfortunately, with the construction of the Moragahakanda reservoir, the government feels that Min area can be used as a store tank or a storage reservoir for feeding reservoirs downstream, Kantale and other reservoirs downstream. So by doing that, from 2018, we have been releasing water during June, July, which is unseasonal release of water into Min area. The wildlife department and the forest department, the irrigation department have agreed that they won't fill it beyond 70%, so that there is 30% grasslands left for the elephants. Unfortunately, we have not effectively communicated that to the elephants. Since I study elephant behavior in Min area for the last five to 6 years, I suddenly noticed in 2018, and I have noticed in 18, 19, 20, where we have been, and 21, where we have been manipulating water in the Min area reservoir during the dry season, that as soon as some water comes in, not even increasing, just a little bit coming in, half of the elephant population almost leaves Min area. So since 2016, I have data, and 17, we had 350 to 400 elephants in August, September. But the data from 2018, 19, 20, and 21, we have had less than 200 to 225 elephants in Min area. So half the gathering is gone already. So if we continue doing that, there will be no gathering of elephants in Min area. So this is something that as conservationists, we have tried. I have spoken personally on this at meetings with the president, the prime minister, and the finance minister, and the environment and the wildlife ministers. We don't seem to be making any headway. But the tourism industry, now Srilal described very eloquently the amount of money you're making from Min area. you bring in better nature interpretation of elephant behavior, the revenue can be doubled. And we are going to lose all that because of human manipulation of water. So I think there is a role for the industry to play once again in trying to appeal to the powers that be. I'm not talking about the wildlife department. I'm talking about the president and everybody else. So we could please try to, I'm appealing to you to try to save Min area and the gathering.
Thanks, Dr. Sumit. I think just that example on the Min area gathering is enough for us to be alarmed and realize how much needs to be done. In the essence of time, Toby, I'm going to quickly move on to you. Similarly, stemming from what we discussed with Dr. Sumit, can you tell us some specific issues to Sri Lanka relating to climate change and plastic pollution? You're on mute, Toby.
That's a giant leap of thought. I had a supplementary question for Sumit, but I'll leave that for later. Yes, well, there are lots of small things that happen which have large long-term consequences. Packaging. Plastic is a subject that is often discussed and brought up. Our operations in Sri Lanka, we tried very hard to be able to run plastic-free trips, which meant we would never have a plastic water bottle. We would always give everyone a bottle when they arrived, and we would refill it with RO water in hotels out of large refillable flagons and stuff en route. And we found that it could be done. But it's actually quite difficult because of packaging and all the other things. If you multiply that from a group of 10 to a country of 21, 22 million, and our day-to-day lives, going to the market to buy vegetables and coming back in a plastic bag, despite all the claims of politicians and administrators that they're going to change the rules, not make plastic, not distribute plastic, it doesn't really happen. Things still come, items are still imported, and they're wrapped in 2, 3, 4 layers of a mixture of cardboard and plastic. Tetra Paks, which take years to biodegrade because it's paper and plastic and foil all compressed together in 7 layers or 9 layers. So this has a direct impact. We've seen these stunning images in the last 2 or 3 years of elephants on landfill sites. I mean, they're heart-wrenching images. And this is how we are taking over elephant habitat. And actually, this does, in a sense, lead me to a question I wanted to ask Sumit, which was, is there now, with the movement of elephants out of Min area, is there now a direct impact on human-elephant conflict in outlying areas? Because the elephants haven't just floated up into the heavens, back into being clouds. They have had to go somewhere, and somewhere is where humans are. So we're exasperating human-elephant conflict and all those problems. Likewise, we're exasperating human-elephant conflict by creating these huge sort of drive-by food dumps for elephants who will come to landfill sites. What does that landfill site consist of? A lot of plastic, a lot of tin, which could injure an elephant or other. And it's not just elephants. You'll have civets going there. You'll have, lots of other nocturnal wildlife that we don't necessarily think about in the day-to-day process. And climate also impacts Sri Lanka in other ways. I listened to a fascinating talk on Houghton Plains about 3 or 4 months ago by Rowan Pitavide, and he talked about the cloud forest rising up, getting higher. So the clouds no longer actually enveloped the trees because there's all the pollutants and the air and the hot air that is coming from surrounding tea estates predominantly, and through deforestation and change of land use. So, and climate change. So it's pushing the that cloud level up, which at the moment it sits, or in the past few hundred years, it has sat over Horton Plains and with the trees penetrating it. Now it sits above, may only be 30, 40 meters above, but it doesn't provide water to those trees. So those trees, whether that's the cause of dieback or not, I'm not a scientist and I can't say, but it's certainly having an impact and it's changing. So the action of agriculture mixed with climate change, the reality of climate change, which we're all going to suffer from, is having an impact on Horton Plains, which is the most visited national park in the country, and is as delicate and as sensitive, and is, I mean, in many ways, Horton Plains is a bigger treasure house than Yala is. Yala may have elephants and leopards, but Horton Plains has got a lot of phenomenal, the biodiversity is phenomenal. And as Sumit said, one suggestion a few years ago was that Sri Lanka's biodiversity was second only to Costa Rica in terms of land availability and things. I mean, Brazil would have greater, but it's a million times bigger. So for a relatively small nation, Sri Lanka is second only to Costa Rica. So this is society has to change. This is not so much tourism, but tourism can take a lead by example. And look, I mean, the philosophy of the company I work with, which is really a conservation company, is care for the wild, care for the land, and care for the people. And tourism has to be part of that. And the travel trade cannot just take from going to parks. If you, this is a slight digression, but if you're a lodge on the edge of a national park, and let's say, I'm making the figure up, but let's say Yala has 100 properties that would not exist around it if Yala didn't exist. Their advertising is XYZ Lodge, Yala National Park. They provide nothing to the park. I mean, I honestly believe there should be a cess on beds based on some sort of algorithm that Srilal could probably dream up, whereby every property, depending on the number of beds and their published tariff, provides a fee to a fund that the park controls. Now, at the moment, all park revenue goes to Colombo and is in the treasury, and the park operates under a grant. But if the park could earn some funds and it could be managed by the park warden and a few ex officio people to be used, whether it's for emergency use, for cleaning out water bodies in the red season, road repair, welfare for people, for staff, it would revolutionize the whole management of a park. Without, I mean, let the Department of Wildlife Conservation get on with what they're supposed to do, which is protection and management. So I can go on, but you probably have more questions. You're now mute, Niranga.
Sorry about that. You actually helped us there because you answered the next question that we were going to direct to you, which is what can be done. So you helped touch on that. In the essence of time, I'm going to move on to Srilal as well in terms of solutions. Toby has touched upon what can be done. Dr. Sumith has also touched upon this in a couple of places. But a question that's on everybody's mind, Srilal, is it too late?
No, definitely not too late. If we can look at things out of the box, find solutions in an innovative manner, we certainly can. Because there's one big stumbling block, as Toby said, the money goes to the government. And with the Fauna and Flora Act, every single wild animal and plant belongs to the government. So we in the private sector can't do anything. But there are ways of getting around it. The private sector can come into small partnerships with different agencies. Let me take one to play devil's advocate with Toby and his garbage dump elephants quickly. It's a very sad sight to a layman to see those elephants in the garbage site. But top scientists like Dr. Preethiviraj and Jenny has done extensive research on these elephants. And they have found that those elephants in the garbage dump are in much better body condition than the elephants within the park. They're getting better food, right? This is amazing. But of course, yes, there is plastic, there's tin. So wouldn't it be a better way of conserving this situation by putting in some sorting mechanism so that you sort the garbage out and put it in with private sector help? Let the elephants be there. Bring in the villagers to show the elephants to the tourists so that there is a win-win situation for everyone. Right? It's a controversial situation thing, but the scientists are telling this to us. So why don't we use that rather sorry situation to create something? So this is because we look at we are trying to find standardized solutions which will not work. We have to look out of the box. What about the initiative John Keels is doing to protect the leopards in Yala by giving villagers cages to put their goats in the night so that the leopard can't come and kill the goats, because if the leopard kills the goats, then the villagers kill the leopard. So you must think of a different type of solution. In a small way, we can make some impact, I think.
Some words of hope there as well, Srilal, for all of us. As we move towards the last couple of questions in this webinar, really appreciate what has been shared. And I think what's really important here is the Sri Lanka Tourism Alliance is very much about supporting the private sector in terms of creating a more prosperous and sustainable tourism industry for all of us. In that light, I'd like to come across to our last question, and this one we'd like to give the opportunity for each of us, or for each of you all to share a couple of final words. What is the one thing each of you think an individual business can do to make a difference? Dr. Sumit, may I start with you?
Yes, thank you. Niranga, I hope you don't mind. Without answering that question directly, I'm going to make another comment because the other two are going to answer that question. I'd like to compliment something that Srilal said. Srilal said that based on his calculations, an elephant was worth $22,000 based on tourism revenue only. I was reading a study recently that has been done in Africa on the forest elephants. And they compared forests with elephants and forests without elephants. And the carbon sequestration value of forests with elephants was so high that each elephant was, the value of one elephant throughout its lifetime on carbon sequestration was $1.75 million US. Sri Lanka, we have forest elephants. We don't have savanna elephant type elephants. Our elephants reside largely in forest habitats. If we do a study like that and we figure that out, that would hopefully try to propel the government to conserve the elephants. So I think that is something very, very important for all of you all. I'm hoping that the tourism sector is going to lobby the government, things like that, for you all to try to put on the table when you're talking to government. Briefly on your question, I think we need to involve local communities in whatever we do, because for sustainable management of protected areas, the local community has to play a role. So I think hotel operators, tourism operators around national parks right now do very little. I wouldn't say nothing, but do extremely little to try to involve the local communities and make sure that they get some economic benefits out of being surrounded by a national park, because they get all the human-wildlife conflict problems. So that is something that each industry could do if they are surrounding a national park. Since I'm out of time, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Toby, I'd like to move the same question to you in terms of what individual businesses can do. And maybe if you could also tell us a success story from India or some of the other places that you've worked in brief. You're on mute.
A 10-second addition to what Sumit just said about the value of forest elephants. The same applies to whales, and the whales in the oceans and the seas around Sri Lanka are vitally important. In effect, the more whales you have, the more fish you have. I'm not going to spend time trying to explain that equation. But it seems to be a fact. I'm also I don't believe garbage tourism is the way forward. I think that garbage tourism for wildlife viewing is a failure of park management. If a forest is not richer than a garbage dump, then something has got seriously wrong. Travel trade needs to take collective responsibility. We should not be working in isolation. I hate to say we need regulations, but we do need some sort of, because that's a government thing and then it gets abused. But we do need, if the travel trade can't come together to self-regulate, then someone is going to come down on the travel trade. And by travel trade, I call it hotels, Jeep drivers, DMCs, tour operators. It's a sort of collective term. So we do need to do things. This happened in India a few years ago. And there was a public interest litigation case, which is a very powerful and useful legal tool where a citizen can go to courts. And this ultimately ended up in the Supreme Court saying the parks were created for, as they were in Sri Lanka, parks were created for the protection of wildlife. And in Sri Lanka, you have the Flora and Fauna Preservation Ordinance, and that is the prime responsibility and purpose. Tourism is an extension of education and recreation, which is a vital part of society, but it wasn't their prime purpose. So therefore, parks should be closed to all tourists. And the Forest Department sort of which runs parks in India, got sort of into this, and then all sorts of harebrained ideas came up. And it ended up in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, well, if you can't organize this amongst yourselves, we're going to close the tiger reserves, which are 51 national parks, protected areas. So the Supreme Court closed them. And they said, come back in 3 months with a solution. And you, the Forest Department, the wildlife part of the Forest Department, you, the travel trade, you, interested individuals, NGOs, conservationists, whoever, need to come together and come up with a plan. And a park such as Kanha in central India, which is 2,000 square kilometers in total, if you include the buffer area, so a lot bigger than all the blocks of Yala put together, more than double, and Governor, had 3 major gates. So they said, right, I'm not being exact on the figures, but the scale is correct. 45 vehicles can go into this gate in the mornings, 35 in this gate in the morning, and 30 in this gate. And in the afternoon, it would be a little less, 40, 25, and 20. So suddenly, the free-for-all has stopped. And that still exists 9 years later. And the revenue at the gate for some of those parks is way over $1 million per year. And the parks retain that revenue. And they use it for protection, they use it for things. So I think the travel trade needs to come together and create a system where it is slightly exclusive. And I know that goes against the sort of idea that it's, everyone every citizen should have access. But we need to then, the next stage is we create other areas for mass tourism outside the core of national parks. We use great buffer areas and use those and turn those into recreational areas.
Thanks, Toby. Some great insights in terms of how we also compare to places like India. Srilal, I'm going to take the same question across to you very quickly. What is the one thing we can do as individual businesses?
Without talking at a macro level, and since Alliance is involved, can't we say that let's choose 15 businesses who have in tourism, who have a say in who are close to wildlife parks, and help every one of them to take on one small project in the vicinity of the park, with, like Sumit said, with the community or really with the park, and really set out a plan. So if we can get 15 small projects supported by each of these companies to be helped along with the alliance, to take on some small aspect in that area, I think we will showcase that anyone, even at small levels or at business levels, can make a difference in spite of the park management being under government control. So I think something like that, a more workable, small scale project that we can say, look, we showed that people can do this. It might be a good thing to, park and do some follow-up work.
I think it's the micro changes that'll all add up to a lot as we go on. I'm actually going to move on to our Q&A session because we're running out of time here. There's quite a few questions that have come through, but I think I'm only going to be able to select one or two. One interesting question here, which we haven't directly touched on: who stands out as a private sector operator globally who is championing conservation tourism? I can direct the question to anyone who would maybe want to contribute if there is a particular company you would like to highlight. Would you like me to repeat? Go ahead.
Many companies are now embracing sustainable or responsible tourism, but I'm not sure whether we can highlight any particular company by name. In Sri Lanka, of course, there are many companies, I need not mention the names, who have taken sustainability and wildlife to a great extent and actually created something which is marketable. So it's not only doing good, but it also turns into a unique selling proposition that one can use. So I think generally the tourism is moving towards this, and many tour operators, I think there was an initiative some time ago that in addition to your in addition to your stars in the brochure or your website, you can have green balls to say how sustainable, how responsible you are. You see, so things like that. So I think there is a market push gradually coming in, and very soon it will have to be followed by everyone.
Thanks, Srilal, on that. I think we have space just for one more question. What are your views on a conservation levy paid by visitors to support protecting Sri Lanka's natural assets? Do you think this would work? Toby, would you like to take that? I think
it's vital. I mean, I think it's not just paid by visitors. I think all the stakeholders need to pay. I think the hoteliers need to pay. I think the tour operators need to pay. As a travel company in Colombo, as a tour operator in Colombo, we send people to Pilapitiya, Wharton Plains, Yala, wherever it may be. I believe that, when to have access to those parks for our clients, we need to pay. Likewise, a hotel or a lodge outside, you wouldn't build a hotel, you might build a hotel at Hambantota because of the archaeological sites around it and Minaria as a bonus, but you probably wouldn't build a lodge, I don't know, by the dam of the Udawallawi Dam, just for the dam. You're building it because you have access into this park, and therefore you're there only because you take people into the park. So without the park, you wouldn't have a business. So your business needs to pay. So if you build a hotel with 50 rooms, you need to pay, and I'm making this just a made up figure, 1,000 rupees per bed per month to the park trust fund. And I call it the trust fund. So it's not the park fund that goes whizzing off to the treasury in Bhattramula or wherever it may be, but it actually is kept locally, used locally. So I do believe that not only tourists should pay, I mean, tourists in a sense are paying because they're paying a ticket to get into the park. So that they are already contributing. I believe it's the providers that need to make a contribution.
Niranga, I would like to add one point to what Toby said. See, we have to make sure in Sri Lanka that the money is used for the purpose intended. We are very good at collecting money for various purposes, but using it for some completely different purpose. So if a conservation levy is, I totally agree with Toby that there has to be a conservation levy. But my worry is that the conservation levy may not be used for conservation. It could be used for other purposes. That is where we have to be careful.
Well, Sumit, we need to make sure it doesn't go to the treasury. We need to make sure it goes to some sort of local trust that's set up. And you can, again, learn from the mistakes of neighboring countries, what India or Nepal has done. The park revenue in a park in say, central India is retained by the park. And the park management, together with local stakeholders, is involved in various committees for the distribution of that. It's not perfect, but it's a beginning.
Thanks so much, Toby and Dr. Sumit on that. We've come to the end of this webinar. So once again, Srilal, Dr. Sumit, Toby, thank you for all the insights that you've shared with us. To wrap up, I'm going to hand back to Malik now.
Thank you, Sumit, Srilal, Toby, and Niranga. That really was a stimulating discussion. It was also rather depressing, not surprisingly. I mean, as we've heard, we are desecrating our treasure house, the treasure house that provides oxygen, that provides water. Even if as tourism operators, even if that doesn't matter, if there's one thing that we need to establish is that link between the future of our businesses, even our selfish self-interest is in jeopardy if we do not come together to lobby the government to protect our biodiversity. Tourism operators and associations should demand that. Sad to see there is a great deal of apathy amongst the tourism operators, except for a few specialist, passionate folks out there, many of whom who are on this chat. I repeat that the tourism industry is generally apathetical about biodiversity, and if they do not understand the link to the future of their businesses, then there is going to be a very serious reckoning. It really is a scary outlook for society, and I repeat, for our individual tourism businesses, because I have to appeal to our selfish self-interest, even if we don't look at society as at large, that unless tourism lobbies government with specific measures, as we heard from the experts, that is something hopefully this webinar can achieve, even if we don't have answers to all the problems that we are facing. So please, even at this late stage, it can be done. Let tourism speak in one voice. Mainstream operators as well as the specialist operators who are already converted to this cause. This session is available on our Facebook page if you'd like to see it again. The next webinar in this series sometime in September will feature trailblazers who have developed tourism products that focus on conservation. And that in turn gives their business greater vibrancy, gives them better rates and so on. So that's the next session. The Tourism Alliance, we've also created a petition on change.org. The link was shared on the chat, and it will be in the follow-up email that you will receive to try and save the gathering. It may be too late. The elephant numbers in August of this year had dropped to 67 from over 400 of August last year or in 2018. Please sign up to that petition because anyone who has a hotel in the cultural triangle, apart from Sigiriya, this is the second largest tourist. It may be the number one. Your business is in jeopardy. So let's even look at it from our selfish self-interest. If you have a hotel in the cultural triangle, your business is at risk. Thank you for spending time with us. Keep safe and well. Thanks again to all of you, the panelists, for your valuable contribution. Thank you. Keep safe and well.